Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so thrilled to have you here today. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today we're looking at the incredibly rich, deeply layered historical timeline of Eritrea. You know, to truly understand a nation's identity, it's absolutely fascinating to look at how it presents its own story. So today, we're going to explore this history strictly through the perspective and the official records provided by the Eritrean embassy. We'll be navigating through their documented timeline to see exactly how they define their journey from ancient times right up to the modern era.
Now, I want you to reconsider what you might already know about the Horn of Africa. Is it actually possible for a country to be one of the newest, yet oldest in the world? Well, the embassy's records highlight this really fascinating paradox. Eritrea is considered one of the newest countries in the modern world, and yet it possesses incredibly ancient roots stretching back millennia. It's essentially a modern state forged by very recent struggles, but built entirely on the foundation of an ancient civilization. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 key sections: ancient roots and trade routes, decades of foreign colonization, annexation and broken promises, the 30-year liberation war, and finally, independence and modern reconstruction.
It is kind of wild when you map out the sheer number of geopolitical shifts this region went through before finally establishing independence. I mean, just looking at the span of a single century, the territory transitioned through Italian control, a British military administration, a UN-mandated federation with Ethiopia, full annexation, and then a 30-year armed struggle. It's a remarkable representation of a remarkably turbulent century.
Section 1. Ancient Roots and Trade Routes. So let's start with the name itself. Eritrea. It actually comes from the Greek word Eritrean, which literally just translates to red. This is a direct reference to the Red Sea. And the crucial point here is how intrinsically tied the nation's identity is to its strategic coastal geography. Its very name is a monument to the waters that brought both vast wealth and, frankly, immense foreign interest to its shores.
And these historical roots, they go way, way back, stretching all the way to 6000 BC. We see the introduction of Christianity super early on, around 338 AD, followed by the arrival of Islam in 615 AD. The records specifically point out thriving ancient trading cities, like Kohaido, situated up on the high plateaus. Because of this incredibly vital trading route, foreign rulers and empires constantly struggled for control over the region for centuries. This geographic blessing essentially set up a recurring historical theme of external intervention.
Section 2. Decades of foreign colonization.
You know, Italian colonization didn't kick off with some massive invading army. Surprisingly, according to the embassy's account anyway, it all started back in 1869 when an Italian monk simply purchased a plot of land in Assab on behalf of a shipping company. That land was later sold to the Italian government in 1882. Fast forward to 1885, and this had escalated into the military conquest of Massawa to consolidate the coastline. Finally, on January 1, 1890, King Umberto I officially declared Eritrea an Italian colony, complete with newly delineated borders. So, a simple commercial land purchase systematically evolved into full-blown colonial conquest.
Then, following World War II, the British took over after defeating the Italians at the Battle of Keren in 1941. The embassy describes a British caretaker policy that, in their view, actively worked to keep Eritrea weak. The official records report that they literally moved Eritrean industries from Asmara and Massawa all the way to Kenya as war compensation. They dismantled railways, destroyed factories, and even proposed dividing the territory along religious lines between Ethiopia and Sudan. From the source's perspective, this era was entirely defined by deliberate dismantling and the breaking of initial promises of self-governance.
Section 3. Annexation and broken promises.
Following the British exit, a really rapid succession of external mandates reshaped the nation completely. A United Nations commission investigated the region, and the embassy's records state explicitly that the majority of the Eritrean people wanted complete independence at this time. However, the UN General Assembly ignored this and actually forced Eritrea to accept the federation with Ethiopia in 1952. 10 years later, after continuous violations of the terms, Ethiopia's emperor dissolved the federation entirely and formally annexed Eritrea in 1962.
So, why the push for this federation in the first place? Well, the source material argues that under the guise of reconciliation, this move actually served Western interests. Specifically, it provided a path for the United States to secure a military base right in the capital, Asmara. The records view this era as one where local self-determination was actively traded away for foreign geopolitical strategy.
Section 4. The 30-Year Liberation War.
September 1, 1961. This is when the revolution began, and the challenges these independence fighters faced? Absolutely massive. They were up against an opponent with a significantly larger population and far, far superior armaments. They had to battle large-scale foreign intervention, and beyond the military forces, they were basically fighting nature itself, overcoming incredibly rough terrain, harsh weather conditions, and severe famines that led to starvation. It was a literal David and Goliath scenario drawn out over 3 brutal decades.
The embassy's history captures this immense sacrifice with a really powerful sentiment. The agony of those years and the ecstasy of the final triumph still hang in the air. I mean, that really captures the deep emotional weight and the staggering human costs of this conflict. The source documents speak heavily of the martyred fallen and the echoes of heroism that went well beyond the call of duty. The modern nation's identity is permanently tied to the memory of this specific sacrifice.
But against all odds, the climax of the struggle arrived. On May 24, 1991, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front captured the capital city, Asmara, finally ending 3 bitter decades of war. A provisional government was immediately formed, which led to an internationally monitored referendum in 1993 that formalized their long-sought sovereignty. The vision of independence was finally realized.
Section 5. Independence and Modern Reconstruction.
When the war ended, the infrastructure was just devastated. The immediate priority became self-development and securing water. Now check this out. At independence in 1991, Eritrea had fewer than 100 dams and water reservoirs. Today, they report having more than 900. Rebuilding meant quite literally starting with the earth and water.
And that infrastructure boom translated directly to massive human impact. Access to safe drinking water skyrocketed from a mere 7% at independence all the way up to 95% today. It clearly demonstrates how the newly formed government tackled the absolute most fundamental, life-sustaining resources right out of the gate. Right after water, the nation pushed hard for agricultural self-reliance. Today, 75% of the country's food requirements are produced domestically. When you connect this back to those historical famines and the starvation they endured during the 30-year Liberation War, this statistic isn't just about agriculture anymore. From their perspective, it is entirely about safeguarding national security and national dignity.
These efforts also sparked some massive leaps in social justice and human capital. National legislation was put in place to safeguard women's equal access to resources. In terms of health, more than 80% of the rural population now has access to healthcare within just 3 miles, and infant immunization sits at a really impressive 95%. On top of that, education is completely free for all citizens up to the tertiary level, with elementary education being mandatory. They even constructed 7 new colleges across different parts of the nation just to actively integrate higher education directly within regional communities.
Which brings us to a final thought for today. How exactly does a nation forge its identity from both the weight of its ancient geography and the scars of its modern struggles? As we've seen through the lens of the embassy's records, Eritrea is a land defined by its coastal trade routes, repeatedly tested by foreign powers, and ultimately reborn through a grueling 30-year war for self-determination. The infrastructure and the social programs being built today are a direct, undeniable response to the hardships of yesterday. I'd really encourage you to reflect on how these deep historical layers continue to shape not just this country, but how nations all over the world tell their own stories of resilience. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.